Welcome to Coffee Threads, an online broadcast that shares remarkable stories connected to the world of coffee, but not necessarily about coffee. Hi, I'm Bill Fishbein, and this is Thomas Isole, and we're here today with Dean Cycon of Dean's Beans, one of specialty coffee's most remarkable luminaries. Those who know Dean may assume we're here to talk about Dean's Beans and its mission to use specialty coffee as a vehicle for positive change. I'm sure we'll be talking enough about Dean's Beans, but we're here today more specifically to talk to Dean about Dean and his many adventures, past and present, in and outside the world of coffee. Thomas?
Welcome. Thank you very much. This is also being sponsored by cocomiel.org, a importer and purveyor of organic coffee, honey, and chocolate. And stick around after our interview with Dean because we want to share with you a little bit more about what the channel is and the type of interviews we're going to be doing and the type of programming. So let's go ahead and welcome Dean.
Welcome, Dean.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Thomas.
So, Dean, before we get into one of the trips that you've recently made, just give us a quick, brief intro about Dean's Beans.
Well, we're not supposed to be talking about Dean's Beans, but I will say I started 29 and a half years ago with the idea that business could be a successful vehicle for social, economic, and environmental change at the source and at home, but to do it in a way that had as much integrity as possible, not shoveling it off to marketing firms and international nonprofits, of which Bill and I founded the first one in coffee. But that's a whole separate story, separate episode. And I wanted to see if it was possible to pay the farmers real money. This is even before fair trade hit America, and still be profitable because I'm trying to create a new business model. And then would it be possible for a business to be deeply and directly involved in the developmental issues of importance to the farmers and still be profitable? If I could do those two things, I had a new business model. If I could do those two things and lose money, then I had another nonprofit. Well, 29 years later, here we are. We're profitable every year. This year, after 29 years, we've grew 16% so far this year. That's outrageous for a company of our age. You know, usually doddering senior companies over 20 years or so, if they're lucky, they grow 2% a year, 3% a year. Maybe they lose a couple this year, but we've grown every single year for 29 years, and we're up probably more now than since we were 5 years old. So the point is, the business model works. People in the coffee industry can do what we do successfully. Yeah, they're going to lose a little bit of their profit on their $30 a pound coffee, but you know what? Not a bad idea if you're trying to have a meaningful impact in the world.
Thomas?
Well, I'd just love to get right into this recent trip that you did, but before that, do you have anything that
I think it's great. I mean, I'd just like to say that the purpose of today's broadcast is to look at not just Dean and Dean's Beans, although we're going to cross that path, but to see some of the different avenues that Dean has taken in his life, that coffee has been on the road, but he's taken a few exits that are pretty remarkable. And we might want to start with the first one, because I believe recently you went to Ukraine, or shall I say Poland?
Well, yes, my wife and I spent 2 weeks on the Polish-Ukrainian border in March, actually, because that was pretty much at the beginning of the war. Both of us are feeling very strongly. For personal reasons, my grandmother fled what's now Belarus from Pinsk in 1906 to escape the pogroms of the Russians, Cossacks. And her parents were trapped, and her mother rather, fought in the Warsaw Uprising against the Nazis in Poland, and the Red Cross came and actually saved her and took her out. So we both have this feeling of, you know, you can go in and you can help people in desperate need. And so we went there first with the eye on how can we help the refugees coming across the border. And that was very hands-on, from carrying suitcases to buying a wheelchair to help people get across the border, you know, very practical things. But because of my background and, you know, the way Bill and I always operated, I was there with a bigger agenda. I wanted to do the helping hand out $100 bills to mothers coming across the border, because it was all women and children, because fighting age men couldn't leave Ukraine. So we stayed there for a couple of weeks, and while we were there, we figured out that housing was one of the major problems for refugees coming over. And so we started working on housing, and I found a number of hotel chains who were willing to give us a really good discount to put Ukrainian refugees, especially Roma, gypsies, as they used to be called, Roma people, who are the most disenfranchised of the most disenfranchised. And nobody wanted them there, including the Polish, who were so generous to so many other people, but not to the Roma. So we concentrated on that, and got a couple months guaranteed of housing for several hundred Roma people. And now Annette has continued to work with the Roma Social Service Agency, basically young Roma women and men who are helping the people there. She's doing a great job with that. And I have turned my attention not only to supporting evacuations, which we've been doing since day one and still going on, but also I'm now working with 6 roasters, coffee roasters and roaster cafes in the city of Kharkiv. Sounds like Kharkiv, but it's pronounced Kharkiv, to help them get back on their feet, to help them get green beans, which they can't access because they don't have money to buy them. And obviously you can't do a roastery without green beans. So putting on my development cap, in talking to the roasters, I found that was the place that I could make the most effective intervention to start. So I started supplying them with green beans to get their operations up and running again. And then I'm now working with them for a number of interesting things. One cafe, their barista went in the army, and then a couple weeks later, he lost both his legs. Now, I've worked with landmine victims in the coffee regions for a number of years, so I know what the problems are. I know where the resources are. So I've been working with them, not only to help him get his prosthetics and training, but to know that he can come back to being a barista. Because in Nicaragua, we trained a young woman who lost her legs to a landmine to become a barista. And she participated in national competitions. And, so it's not the end of the road for people in the coffee industry who are victims of war and limb loss. Other than that, some of the other programs, you mind me continuing on this? Give you the detail?
Yeah, I would like to bring it to to continue. Yeah.
Well, I hope so. Okay, so let me just tell you one more thing. So
just so you know, Dean, I don't know if we even have to interview you. We just say go, and
it's more about holding me back than prodding me onward. But let me tell you one more thing. So the next deep dive with these communities is I was asking one of the roasters who we helped relocate his roastery, and now we're building a hostel for roasters displaced from the war zones. What is the biggest need in the immediate community? And he said, interestingly enough, the biggest need is for service providers, and that is the guys and women who go out and repair the electric, repair the gas, repair the water lines, and repair the sewer lines after the Russian missiles blow them up, and while there's still hot war going on. What do they need? They need first aid kits, they need bulletproof vests, and they need shoes. They need hard shoes, stepping in mud, stepping on slicing, crusty metal and things like that. So we've been getting those things into Ukraine. So it's not always the glamour of, like World Food Kitchen, which we worked with, feeding hundreds of people every day. It's like they don't need food. They need shoes. They need bulletproof vests. They need other assistance that's not as glorious sounding, but it's what they need. And if you're going to do effective development, it's about what the people's priorities are, not what we think they are. Wouldn't you say that, Bill?
I would, and it leads me to my next question, which is that you followed a path that you call people-centered development.
Right.
And I'd like you to, talk about that. Talk about your ideas about people-centered development.
Okay, so there are a few really good grassroots organizations, such as Coffee Trust and a few others that actually work on the ground with the farmers. But the majority of development-oriented nonprofits are large, what are called bingos, big international NGOs that get a boatload of money from USAID, from different State Department, different programs, and, you know, frankly, have to sing the tune a little bit to get that money. Not only that, but they have huge infrastructure, tons of employees, large salaries, and it blows my mind that one company that we talked to about doing a well project in Ethiopia, they said, yeah, we can do that well. It'll cost about $50,000 to build the well. And I thought, that's outrageous. So I worked with the community. We created a water committee. They went out and found the people to build the well and build the piping, et cetera, $4,000. Okay, because the community controlled it, because we weren't paying the salaries of people in Washington and New York, right? So large organizations are full of wonderful people who have really great intentions, but the structures that they created are incredibly inefficient and, to be honest with you, not long lasting, because the programs are not based in the communities from community identified needs, and the people aren't involved in the running of it. They're passive recipients of Northern largesse, Northern hierarchy. And let me tell you, when a big white guy in a flowery shirt with sunglasses walks into a Latin American village of indigenous people and says, "Hi, I'm here to help," the first thing people think is El Jefe. It's yet another boss coming in here to tell us what to do. And if we want to sell him coffee, or we want this program, this chicken program or whatever, we got to do what he wants, tell him what he wants to hear. So it basically, those systems create another level of hierarchy over the villages, which don't last. And if you talk to any large nonprofit, they will tell you, if you say, "So what happens to your program after you leave that village?" And if they're honest, they'll say, "We don't know," because their programs are basically 3-year time frames. After those 3 years, they move on to the next valley, the next village, the next program, because they're donor driven and they're cycle driven by USAID, for example. So it's not like they do long-term commitments in a village for 10 years. In our case, we've been working with Proto Co-op for 25 years. I'm going to be visiting them next year, with literacy programs, mind-blowing village-based literacy programs, reforestation programs, just a million things we've been doing with them over the years based on their priorities and what their capabilities are. So the way we set it up is we go into the villages, we talk to people, we meet with women's groups, we meet with civil society, and we ask them not what do you need, but things like, how would you like to see your daughter's life different from your life? That then leads to the next levels of question, where they start talking about the actual impediments to their kid getting an education that we wouldn't know about because we don't live there, right? So that then leads to, okay, what can we do about that together? That leads to the design of a program where we're designing it together because they know more than we do. We facilitate well, but we don't know the details or the local structures. Then what we do is, if we need to, we will bring in trainers who come in and train people in whatever the task is, whether it's the computer accounting, whether it's technical skills on water management or running a women's loan fund. But the people in the villages themselves own and operate and manage the program. That is radically different. And that doesn't guarantee success, but it sure goes a long way to leading to more successful outcomes. And, you know, in like 29 years of Dean's Beans, and throw another 5 of Coffee Kids on there, we've only had a handful of things that didn't end up working. In some cases because the co-op folded, in some cases because somebody stole the money. Well, guess what? They do that up here too, right? Read the paper today about these 47 guys who swindled billions out of the federal government that was supposed to go to child feeding during the pandemic, right? So yeah, so some guy in Guatemala steals the money and buys himself a pickup truck. God, does that mean the whole thing is ridiculous? No, it means people are people, and some people are going to get what they want in ways that we don't approve of. So that's people-centered development. It's all about, it's based in the villages, and the people own and operate it and have a sense of ownership. And the last thing I have to say on that is it's ultimately not about how many loans go out or how much jars of honey we sell. It's really about changing the people's attitude about themselves so that they no longer see themselves as passive recipients or victims of the market, but rather agents. You know, I've got agency here. And if I have agency here, I'm going to have more agency in my voting, in my community, on, you know, what I demand for us as a family, you know, and the only true social change is when people change. It's not the provision of goods. Hurricanes come along and wipe out everything you did for the last 10 years all the time. But what remains are the people. And if they have a stronger sense of self and you've participated in that, then that is true people-centered development.
That's great. It brings me to another thought, that what you're doing, what you've been doing and you continue to do in Ukraine costs money. And
Yes.
what you're doing as through Dean's Beans also costs money. So tell me about the difference. Did you get support from the coffee industry or from your friends for either one, or how do you do it financially?
Everything about Dean's Beans in the coffee lands has been through the sales of coffee. So we've never asked for a penny from anybody else because that's our business model. We're trying to prove that Dean's Beans, who sells organic fair trade coffee for $12.95 online for £1, you know, can have 100% health care for everybody who works at Dean's Beans, profit sharing for everybody who works at Dean's Beans, profit sharing with the farmers, providing development support with the farmers, all the things we do, and we're still profitable. So if we're profitable at more than fair trade prices at this end and lowest prices to the consumer at this end, how profitable are all those other coffee companies? And do they need to be that profitable? I get it, you know, make as much money as you can and the market rewards you, yada, yada. But, and that's fine if you're only looking through the lens of accumulation. But if you really believe in the word partnership, which everybody in the coffee industry throws around, if you really believe in concepts of sustainability, then, you know, you got to get some skin in the game. And you don't do it by giving the farmer a substandard price on this end and charging $25 to $30 a pound and hiding it by selling it by 10 ounces or 12 ounces on that end. Statistic. In the 1970s, the relationship between the money that a farmer got and the money that a retailer got was 1 to 3. I got $3, he got $1. Okay. Today, it's between 1 and 10 and 1 and 20, depending on the coffee company. So have we gained anything in terms of our leveling the playing field with farmers? No. Are farmers poorer than ever? Yes. Not to mention the dollar's strong and their currency's weak, or vice versa. You know, everything we've worked on in the last 35 years or almost 40 years now, right? With Coffee Kids, Dean's Beans, Coffee Trust, we have been trying to model and hope that other people would come aboard. And yes, people will contribute and that feels good, but how many people have actually changed their business model or reconsidered their business model to make it more equitable and fair? Few and far between, I'm sorry to say, but there's plenty of room to change. Hope springs eternal.
Well, that sounds very inspiring. In addition to, I got two questions, and then I'll let you. I'm sorry, I'm occupying.
That's okay.
But I got two. I have two.
Stop interrupting me.
One is, what the business model that you have is remarkable. And do you make any efforts or have people come to you to learn about the model because they would like to do the same thing themselves or something similar?
Well,
that's my first question.
Yeah, there are different venues for that. So we've gotten a ridiculous amount of international awards that no one's ever heard of besides a specialty coffee sustainability thing, which has allowed me to then go and speak in Oslo, London, Tunisia, and other places to share the idea of a different business model with wide audiences. So that's very interesting. Here, I've spoken at over 100 universities and high schools over the last so many years. And I calculated that over 100,000 students have been out there in the audiences and heard. A lot of students come up to us after the talks and say, can I be an intern? Because we have an internship program. And yes, we do. We share that out. And then people then report to me years later how much it affected them. A couple nights ago, Annette and I were in a local bistro having dinner, and a woman comes up to me and says, "Are you Dean Cycon, Professor Cycon?" And I said, yeah, about 30 years ago. She said, "I had you as a teacher in an international environmental law class in 1993, which was the year I started Dean's Beans." She said, "It affected my life. I became a teacher because I really wanted to teach people and share with people." Now she brings over 2 kids. One of them's graduating UMass, the other's a junior, introduces us all. And she said, "You have no idea the effect you had on my life." Wow. So, you know, we're not Stanford. We can't calculate the metrics on these things. If it doesn't grow, it's not meaningful. And, that's a lot of baloney. The amount of people you impact is the most important thing, because you never know where the ripples go. So now Nicole, this woman, has taught, for 20 years, and how many hundreds of students have she impacted, feeding forward. So there's that. Companies have come to us and talked about integrating aspects of what we do in their business model. And I can name the companies that have actually done that. And there are maybe a dozen. So that's good. And, but, at the end of the day, you can only do so much. And someone said, if you just grew and became bigger and bigger and bigger, you could have more impact. And I'm like, yeah, that's one way of looking at it. But I don't believe that growth is the answer to everything. I believe integrity and intentionality is the best you can do. And yeah, the market rewards you, but the market also rewards bullshitters and, and big liars and things like that. So I don't put all my eggs in the market basket. Anyway, I'm proud of what we've done all these years. I wish we could have effected more change, but it's an upstream swim in this.
So when you got started, in the early stages of developing your business, and it sounds like you've really broken away from any of the classical business school teachings.
Right.
You just said, "I'm going to do it on my own." How did you? Because when you're new and you're growing, there isn't always profit. There isn't always the resources that you'd like to be able to put out there. Mm-hmm. How quickly did you launch into sort of getting a foothold into this?
Well, 2 things happen. The first is my background is not business. I was a lawyer, doing regular law, but on the side where my heart was, I was doing indigenous rights law on Indian reservations around the US and Canada. I was doing environmental work for environmental groups, and that was my passion. But then, I got fired. I got fired from my law firm because I wasn't paying enough attention to them. I was paying too much attention to that stuff. So I got fired, and I went home and I told my social worker wife, "Honey, sit down. I got fired today." And she goes, "Well, that's great. Now you can do what you really want to do." I told Bill Fishbein I got fired today, and his father calls me up and says, "What can I do to help you?" And Bill says, "Well, why don't you start a cafe? You've always talked about that." So I started a cafe, thanks to Bill, not his father. He didn't give me any money, but he gave me moral support. So I started a cafe, ran it for a year while I was teaching, while I was doing my indigenous and environmental law for nothing, and limping along. And then I decided that I wanted to start roasting. So for $7,000, I bought a roaster and a couple of bags of coffee. And I figured, well, in 6 months, I'll be roasting all the coffee in this cafe. In 6 weeks, I was roasting all the coffee in the cafe. And it became so popular that people came to us and said, "We'd like to carry your coffee in our co-op. We'd like to carry your coffee in our cafe." There it was. And so I lecture on this stuff all the time in colleges, and I tell people, start small. We've had guys work for us and they go out and they want to start their own coffee company. They immediately buy a 1-bag roaster for a loan for $180,000. And I'm like, you haven't sold coffee yet. Buy a 15-kilo roaster, buy a 5-kilo roaster, get started and ecologically grow. We're an organic coffee company. Grow organically. When the resources are there, when the community is there, you will grow. That's how plants grow. They don't force growth because then they fall over because their roots are too shallow and they kill everything around them. So the point is, I've always believed in organic growth, and Dean's Beans was based on that model. And so we started with $7,000, and then there we went. And every year we got bigger. We're not huge. We're $5.5 million in sales this year. That's not huge, but it's big enough to do what we want to do and support 16 people at Dean's Beans and the communities in 10 countries. It's okay. I'm happy with it. Plus, to be frank, I don't like to work that hard. I know it might not sound like it, but I really don't like to work that hard. I like to create, have fun, do things that are disruptive, but I don't like to work that hard. So growing Dean's Beans any bigger than it is or any other than organically, it's not the way I operate, you know? But you are right, Thomas. I give a lecture called The Myths You Learn in Business School. And one by one, I take on the myth of growth, the myth of profit, Uber alles, the myth of marketing, you know, what marketing is all about. I give that lecture in business schools and people freak out because they say, that's not what the professors are teaching us. And I'm like, that's right, because you're learning a business culture here. Just like The Godfather lived in a business culture, just like William White from Breaking Bad lived in a culture that, you know, you're home and you love your family, but then you go to work and you murder people, right? How is that possible? How is that possible to have different values? Well, that's what business school teaches you. Maybe not to murder people directly, but it teaches you that, well, your home values are your home values, but these are the values you need to succeed. You know, I did, in Tunisia, I was asked to give a course on responsible business after the Arab Spring uprising. So I went in and I did it at the Mediterranean Business School. And I asked the 30 students from all over the Middle East who were there, okay, I'm giving you 2 documents. They have the same sets of values on them. This one I want you to fill out. What are your personal values? And people put it out, you know, family, community, this, that, and then half hour into the first day's lecture, I said, okay, here's this other set of values, same set. Here's this other sheet. I want you to tell me what your values are in business. And they put it down, and nobody had the same values. And I said, why is that? And they said, because that's what we taught about business. And I said, well, how is your business, how are your values any different when you put on a tie and you go to an office than when you're at home with your family and your neighbors? And they all went, doink, you know, and everybody does. But that's the problem. You learn in business school a separate set of cultural values, and it's very hard to unlearn them when you're told by everybody, this is what you need for success, and when the stock market rewards you for growth. So when Starbucks finds out that it's got a 50% decrease in the cost of its green beans when the market's low, and all of a sudden that means they're earning a ton more money without doing anything, and they don't pay the farmers any more money, the market rewards them because they're more profitable. But are you rewarding them because they're profitable, or are you rewarding them because they're taking advantage of farmers who can't afford to feed their children, right? So
I'd like to say that, yeah, it sounds like to me that businesses are sociopaths. When you take the
businesses are socio. It's just the wrong path, right?
Okay, it's even better.
There was a time when serfdom was socially acceptable. There was a time when slavery was socially acceptable. Were slave owners sociopaths? Yeah, many of them were, but most of them, like, that's just the world they lived in, including many of our founding fathers, right? Was Thomas Jefferson a sociopath? You know, maybe around women, but not generally, you know, but they lived in the world they live in. That's why it's so hard to challenge it. Because when you challenge people on these assumptions, they think you're attacking them personally. You know, it's like when you call the phone company and you get some poor woman on the line and you say, you know, I'm having a problem with my phone. She goes, well, I'd like to help you. And you go, well, you know, the damn phone company, this and that. And she takes it personally, you know, but you're not attacking her personally. You're attacking this system that she represents. And that's where it's really hard, especially in the coffee industry, where everybody thinks they're a good guy. Everybody thinks they're hip, they're intergenerational, intersectional. Everybody's so fucking hip in coffee, you know, that they don't want to look at how their behavior actually impacts people in the real world, right? That's why everybody calls themselves direct trade now without knowing a farmer, because you can get the goodie of direct trade by simply buying coffee from a broker who tells you a little something about the community you bought from, and you say, oh, I'm a direct trader. But if somebody challenges that you're not really very direct, people get offended because their sense of themselves is, I'm a good person. I wouldn't knowingly misrepresent. And yet, 40 years later, not much changed in the coffee world.
How do you challenge yourself, Dean, when you're going down a path, you're working with different cultures, different groups of people, and things do go awry, I imagine. Is there a point when you just know I have to step away because it's not working?
Yeah, 100%. So the thing is, it's like there's an expression that artists fall in love with their models. Well, business people fall in love with their models too, right? And don't want to let them go. But one of the real fundamental principles at Dean's Beans is that we look at our own stuff, and if it doesn't work, we try to fix it, or we move on and recognize it didn't work. Because most of the problems in the business world are created by people who don't acknowledge that they've done something wrong. So, for example, years ago, when Ben & Jerry's had a great program about buying rainforest nuts for their rainforest ice cream, and it was supposed to be saving the forest and all this stuff, it was really successful. It was great. But that side of the business grew so much that they couldn't get enough rainforest nuts from the co-ops they were working with. So they kind of bought them on the market, which was about slave labor, about deforestation. They had no idea where those nuts were coming from, right? So rather than say, wow, we've got this successful program, we're going to limit it because it's a limited edition because we can't get more nuts, they were like, let's make more money on this, and let's hide the fact that we're not actually doing what we're saying we're doing. The folks up in Ben & Jerry's are good people by and large, but they fell into this business cultural trap. So yeah, we don't do that. But then again, like I said, I'm not a business guy. I'm a social justice guy who's using business as a vehicle. So I don't have that kind of adherence, slavish adherence to the business world that other people do. And I advise all people in business to stop and look. Once I gave a talk on business value, running your business as a business based in values. Afterwards, a woman came up to me and said, I love this. I want my business to be values-based. And I thought for a minute and I said to her, but your business is values-based. You just may not know the values that you're actually operating under. Because one thing is in your head, another thing is how you behave. So I said, go back and look at the kind of things we talked about. Look at your supply chain. Look at your environmental impacts. Is that how you want to be? Does that represent your true values? If not, then you got some work to do. But there is no such thing as a value-free business. Every business is a values-based business. But the question is, are they the values that you truly believe in or society would support?
I think that we could talk to you, Dean, for hours. We could talk about how Dean's Beans is carbon negative. We could talk about you challenging Occidental petroleum in Ecuador. We could talk to you about pulling someone out of a bathroom in Iran many years ago. We could talk. We could talk for hours, and I would really like to talk to you in the future about your maybe your latest adventure, which is as an author, and what is inspiring you to write. And I think that we are just running out of time. I think that one of the things that we can clearly articulate today is Dean Cycon is a remarkable person, a remarkable luminary in the world of specialty coffee. And the world of specialty coffee and coffee alone should be, if not, grateful to have you as part of that industry. A remarkable man, Dean Cycon. And we're going to be back with Dean in the future to talk about many of the other things that he's done. We've only scratched the surface with Dean. So please, come back. Dean, please come back.
And bring your friends.
And bring your friends, right? because we want to learn more about all the things that you're doing, the way you're doing it, and how you pursue your values through your business and the way you live your life. I've got 1,000 more questions, and I want to ask them soon. So please come back, and if you're watching, please keep us tuned in, because we're going to have Dean back along with some other people as well to share stories about coffee and what their lives are as connected to coffee, but not necessarily in coffee. Thank you so much, Dean, for joining us today. And I certainly hope to see you real soon.
Thank you, Dean.
Well, I'd love to come back. I'll come back as often as you want. Just don't ask me to wear a black suit.
Okay.
Inside joke. We'll share it on the next episode.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Have a good
Dean.
one.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
All
Well,
I can
Thomas,
say is, like you said, there's 1,000 questions that, I mean, I could have just talked all about the Ukraine, which is a current event, and just seeing all the activity that he's got going on down there. But
it's endless. It's endless.
It really is.
He's a remarkable man who has tackled enormous challenges on so many different areas, not just coffee, not just Ukraine, not just indigenous rights,
Not just business models.
Yeah.
It's everything.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I wanted to do was for the people still tuned in and watching is to let to kind of maybe outline what is Coffee Threads and its connection with Coco Miel, and how we're going to be sort of proceeding forward, because we are going to want to have a lot more content for the audience. I think there's a lot of different people that we're going to be talking to as this unfolds. So I thought maybe the first thing is for people that haven't seen, you know, how you and I met, and like how this all sort of came about.
How Coffee Threads came about?
Well, yeah, how Coffee Threads
Yeah.
came about, Coco Miel, and you and I.
Okay, I mean, you and I met about 7 or 8 years ago.
2017, I think it was.
Okay, 5 years ago.
Yeah,
Oh,
5.
really?
Yeah, I know. I felt longer.
I think longer.
I felt like a lifetime.
Yeah, yeah, I know. It's been a long time. As I understand, you were at one point working in Rhode Island or nearby
In Massachusetts,
and
yeah.
walked into Coffee Exchange,
Yep.
family business of mine. You spoke to my brother who was at the roastery, and somehow were inspired to get into coffee after you were.
After 17 years of
Right.
drinking Charlie's coffee,
Okay,
I decided to get into coffee.
There you go.
But I didn't know Bill.
Yeah, but then what happened?
I move out here,
Yeah.
and I start a small little coffee roasting business. And it took me, you know, that's why I asked Dean the question about how, you know, at what point when you're developing a business, you know, how do you get engaged in things that are bigger than just your business? And for me, it took over 5 years for me to even look up and take my head above water and say, hey, who's working in the coffee industry that's doing something that's really meaningful?
Mhm.
And so I started my second company, which is Trifecta Coffee, as a roaster. And I found you. And I was online and I'm typing and I'm like looking for, you know, nonprofit, you know, organizations, you know, coffee charity. I know how you feel about that word, but, you know, I'm just trying to search because I don't know. And I see Bill Fishbein come up. And I'm like, wow, that name is really interesting, because I know a Charlie Fishbein back in Rhode Island. And unbeknownst to me, I see the bio and I find out that you were the founder of the Coffee Exchange. And I pick up the phone immediately and I'm like, I have to talk to you. and so you called me right back and started telling me about the work you were doing with the Coffee Trust.
Well, yeah, and I do recall that, and we've had a very interesting partnership ever since. Rather than have another interview with you, I think we should have one at a later date. One of our Coffee Threads would be one directly with you. I think that for the listening audience or the viewing audience, I think that they would maybe to show them that, for example, Coffee Threads is sponsored by Coco Miel.
Right.
And Coco Miel is an outgrowth of the Coffee Trust, having the Coffee Trust being a nonprofit that I started years ago. And out of frustration to see coffee producers always getting the short end of the stick and seeing their products sold in the States for gobs of money, that I was, and partly, and not just a small part, inspired by Dean to use a business model to bring coffee producers into the U.S. market. So Coco Miel is an importer and purveyor of organic coffee, organic honey, and organic chocolate. And we sell the product. Half of our gross profits go right back to the producers. The balance, after paying our expenses, go to the Coffee Trust for projects with the producers. That was in large part inspired by the way Dean has done his business. And so that's how we grew. Now Coco Miel is sponsoring Coffee Threads because we want to just show the coffee world and the world beyond coffee what can be done above and beyond the normal business models to be more proactive in helping heal a pained world. So basically, that's where we are. We are going to be back.
We'll be back. There's going to be remarkable stories like Dean's, and I think that's the whole thing, is that it's a remarkable industry. It has so much potential, and I think we want to be able to message those stories.
Yep. And that's what we're going to do. So we hope that you'll keep us tuned in. We have a YouTube channel, is that right?
We're going to be putting this out on probably Rumble and YouTube. And we're going to have a website as well called coffeethreads.com. I just secured the domain.
Okay.
And for right now, though, if you want to see the projects from Coco Miel, you can go to cocomiel.org. There's a link at the bottom of the video. And we really encourage you to check out the coffee, check out the honey, and we've now got some wonderful chocolate as well. So all of that, as Bill said, is in support of some projects. And so we're gonna be back. We've got so many things to talk about on projects that Bill is engaged in as well. And we think that it's about time we started telling these stories.
Okay, so thank you very much. And we'll be back soon, and we hope you'll join us.
Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.